Welcome back to AM Prime, and as you're probably aware of by now, if you've been following the show for the last few months, we here like to support young talent here in TNT, and certainly hope that even just a conversation can pave the way for greater success. Now, this morning, I'm joined by another young individual, specifically an author, whose new book, Red Like Love, is a young adult contemporary fiction novel that follows Caribbean teenager Adara Wells in her coming-of-age story. Well, the author of that novel, Miss Tamara Ali, is with us this morning via Zoom. Good morning, Miss Ali.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'll start by, having taken a look at your bio, you've described yourself as a professional daydreamer. But a professional daydreamer in itself could lead to rather inspirational things. Sometimes if you get too caught up, you might get lost. But is being a professional daydreamer also helpful in terms of you being an author, in terms of inspiration, even in terms of ideas?
Yes. Well, I call myself a professional daydreamer because I like to think I have a very big imagination, because daydreaming is not something that you can actually do professionally, So having a big imagination, of course, helps you with writing. It helps to inspire so much of the things that I write, because a lot of writing not only comes from viewing the outside world, but also thinking in your head, thinking up your own stories and your own ideas. So daydreaming definitely helps with my writing a lot.
But getting lost in a fantasy world might take you away from the true sense of reality, which in a way might also actually do you an injustice when actually writing a novel, especially on the Caribbean teenager, a coming-of-age story. Would you say that sometimes it's difficult to break out of that trance, or is it necessary that sometimes you stay in that trance in order to depict the ideal picture?
I believe it's good to have a balance of both, right? Especially with the types of book that I write. Even though it's fiction, most of it's contemporary. So it's based on more realistic settings, So it's good to have a balance of things that I imagine that came out of my head, and also writing about things that I actually witness, I go through, I know people who do go through, so that the story could be more relatable. So it's good to have a balance of both daydreaming and reality.
So at what age did you actually start writing, whether it be novels, whether it be short stories? At what age did you actually realize, well, I have a talent here and I really enjoy doing this?
I would say maybe at the age of 8. Both of my parents are writers, so I was kind of born with the natural interest in writing. But when I was about 8, 9 years old, I started writing song lyrics. And then eventually I transitioned into short stories, and I tried to write a couple stories when I was about 12, 13 years old, a couple novels. But at the time I didn't have the discipline to complete one. So it wasn't until I was 16 I started Red Like Love, and I actually tried to finish it to complete the manuscript, which I did.
And you suggested that you were born to two writers. Your mother and father are writers. That must have been quite an experience, especially starting a novel at the age of 16, always being behind you, but in the good way, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, it had its ups and downs. For one, they were both very supportive, of course, because they love to see me write and live the dreams that they also, want to live or do live. My mother also is an author. But the downside was probably the comparisons of when I wrote the book. People would be like, oh, you're a writer now like your mommy. And it's like, yes, but I want to be known as me, my writing style, not necessarily like her, you know what I mean?
And what would you describe your writing style as?
I try to keep it very young and fresh so that it's relatable to Caribbean teenagers, as well as so that I can attract teenagers who don't normally read a lot, because that's my goal, is to make a lot of Caribbean teenagers read more. So I try to write in ways that they read it and it doesn't feel as though you're reading a book. It feels like, you're hearing a story from a friend, or you're reading, or you're watching a show,
Mm-hmm. Now, this particular story, Red Like Love, follows a Caribbean teenager, Dara Wells, and her coming-of-age story. Now, most might argue that Caribbean stories focus on some form of struggle, as they would say. But, precisely in this novel, what is the struggle? As a teenager, there's so many things that you go through. What does this novel focus on?
Yes, well, the first thing that you said, that a lot of Caribbean books are focused on struggles. I agree with that. And that's why that was one of the inspirations behind me writing this book, because I wanted there to be more Caribbean books that focus less on things like poverty and those types of struggles, and more modern day and less complicated struggles, the teenager struggles that we think is a big deal now, but really isn't 10 years later. So the struggles in this book Adara is facing, she's going through her first love, which comes with, of course, your first heartbreak. And she's also in secondary school, so she is definitely dealing with a little bit of bullying and trying to fit in with her peers, trying to get boys' attention and this validation. And another one of her struggles in the book is also her home life. She is living with only one parent, which I think is relatable to a lot of Caribbean teenagers. So she definitely has to deal with how her family and growing up is going to impact her love life now. From how do you learn what a healthy relationship is when you don't grow up viewing one?
But as a teenager, though you yourself would have gone through these experiences or some experiences, how is it that you're able to actually delve into the deep psychological issues as you've just described, if you as the author perhaps have not necessarily experienced that?
Well, for this book, I really tried to, at the beginning, I used my life as heavy inspiration. Of course, as I edited and I went through it, it became more of the character's story and less of mine. But as far as the psychological things, the emotional side of things, I really looked into how I felt at certain times in my life and tried to mirror that in the book for the character.
Mm-hmm. Now you've also mentioned Caribbean stories focusing a lot on various issues of struggles, but do you think that there are enough stories out there that focus on the struggles that a Trinidad teen might actually face? Do you think that enough is actually done when you're putting pen to paper to truly describe the situations and scenarios that they might actually go through?
I don't think that there is enough books about Caribbean teenagers. There are some out there. The Trinidad book, the Trinidad writers it's growing. There are lots of Trinidad writers, a lot of Caribbean writers. So the Caribbean stories are growing, but I don't think that there's a lot of Caribbean teenage stories. So hopefully there will be more in the future. I am planning on writing a lot more and to showcase just way more Caribbean teen stories, because we have so much to share, so hopefully there will be more in the future.
Now, you're saying hopefully there will be more in the future. Do you think you'll continue to go on the line of fiction, though it may be based on some form of reality?
Yes, I think that for my future books, I definitely want to stick with fiction. I just believe that it's a lot more fun to write, a lot less pressure than writing nonfiction as well. So I definitely will stick to fiction in the future. I'm not sure if I will stick to young adult. I want to stick to young adult teenage books, but as I get older, I wonder if I will lose the connection to teenagers with writing. So I will stick with it for as long as I can, but I don't ever want to become one of those writers who they write about teenage life and they haven't been a teenager since way back when, so the book isn't really that realistic.
So is it that you're recognizing that the cultures and even the identities of teenagers across the Caribbean tend to evolve.
Yes, I mean, the teenage culture always evolves. You know, there are always different slangs and different things that teenagers do every 5 years. Not once, 10 years from now, the things that were cool and things that we used to say when I was a teenager is not going to be the same, you know.
I'm reading the synopsis of your book, and I'm looking at something here where it says the young Trinidadian girl discovering her sexuality in a heteronormative society. Now, some people might say you're stepping on some toes there. It's a very sensitive topic and not one that is acceptable. Some parents might say, I'm not really interested in my teenager reading this book, and I'm not necessarily going to support it. But is it that you see the need to actually break such stigmas and have such conversations because there is a lack of progress?
Yes. I'm a huge advocate for LGBT plus rights. So I know that it could be a little much of a touchy subject, you know, and that I might not get certain support from it or I might get certain backlash. But I am prepared for that because one of the points of the book is also to talk about queer Caribbean teenagers and, you know, normalize LGBT plus life.
But could you really normalize something that still, after all the advocacy, is not necessarily accepted?
Yes, I know that it might not be accepted, but I mean, that's not going to stop me from telling these stories because, accepted or not, these people still exist. You know, there are still these stories to be told, whether it's accepted or it's liked or it's normalized or not. They're still there and their stories still need to be told. And I will tell them no matter who gives me the backlash.
Now, taking a look at your cover, which was actually on our stories not too long ago, beautiful by the way, the artwork, but the title, Red Like Love, what are you referring to exactly?
So when I was thinking of the title for this book, I was going through a lot of different options in my head. I knew that I wanted love to be somewhere in the title. And the color red was a main theme from the beginning because when I think about the color of love, I think of red. You know, because love isn't always happy, fairy tales, kisses and hugs, you know, and that's not always what you think of when you think of red. Sometimes you think of red and it's blood or it's evil or it's passion, you know, and that's a lot of what also love can be like. It can also be intense, passionate, heartbreaking, blood-wrenching, you know. So that's why I ended up with Red Like Love. And it also comes together in a chapter in the book where the main character has a sentence and has a little item with her that makes you understand the title better once you read it.
That's very interesting. Where do you hope this book in particular, where do you hope it goes? Where do you hope it ends up? There's always an end goal. What is your end goal?
I just hope that Caribbean teenagers and queer Caribbean teenagers can read this book and feel heard and feel seen. I also hope that it can open up the conversations of a young person figuring out their sexuality and their identity, you know, and that's not always a bad thing, as well as young people going through love. I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, well, you're young, you don't know what love is, and you don't know anything, you're not supposed to be focusing on this and boyfriend and this and that. But of course they will, you know, and that's as a normal part of life. I also hope that my book and my future books can encourage more Caribbean teenagers to read. I feel like if they see themselves in stories, they will be more likely to want to read the stories and want to read more books. So that's another hope of mine. And lastly, I also hope that this book just puts Trinidad even more on the map. You know, I want it to go international, have international sales, so that Trinidad and its culture, because there's a lot of Trinidadian culture featured in the book as well, so that it goes global.
Well, that is a goal that we all support and we will all cheer for. But it also, not to get deeper into conversation because we're running out of time, but it also sounds as though It's a sort of novel of a teenager trying to help other teenagers, because those teenagers may not get the help that is necessary, or the understanding that is necessary, even by those who have gone through what they have, but are now walking in the shoes of an adult.
Yes, it's definitely for Caribbean teenagers by a Caribbean teenager. There are little things in the book that the main character goes through, like little things, that lessons that she learns. So I also hope that Caribbean teenagers, if they are reading it and at that time they might need the same guidance, that the main character's story can also help guide their real life story.
Well, Ms. Tamara Ali, congratulations on your self-published Red Like Love book. The story rather is very interesting, and even the title itself is rather peculiar to the mind. But as I close, you said something there about hoping that it will encourage and inspire more young authors to go through with their goals, with their aspirations, with their dreams, but also to get more teenagers to read. Is it that could you write a novel without not reading? Could you write a manuscript, a script, or a novel without not reading books before?
I would very much encourage reading first. I think once you read, it not only opens up your imagination, but you also get to see the structure of a book, how a book is set up, and you will also learn new words and new phrases and new ways to introduce characters and develop a story. So reading definitely will help your writing.
Well, Ms. Tamara Ali, thank you very much for joining me on AM Prime this morning. Always happy to support a young individual who's trying to make a difference in more ways than one. And yours through writing. It's amazing at such a young age you're out there writing books. There are many like you who don't even have the courage to push through with such a goal. And I can only hope that everybody takes some form of inspiration from your story. Not just the part about being a professional daydreamer or the Caribbean fiction novel, but the story of who Tamara Ali is as a young author. Thank you very much. Congratulations and all the best to you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Well,